All right. Good morning, everybody. Let's get rolling. Got a few things to talk about today. Hopefully, we'll wrap up PIMS, and then we have a few other items that we need to touch on. Thanks for the comments, the reply comments on the PIMS. Why don't we start with the utilities? Chris, are you on the call? I'm assuming you're going to be presenting, sir.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Chris Walls with BGE. And yes, Judge McLean, if you don't mind, may I just summarize the comments? I do have a couple of charts that I want to share, but before I do that, I'd like to just summarize the comments. Just take a few minutes, if I may.
Please do.
Thank you. So again, thanks for the opportunity to summarize our comments. And just to be clear too, Judge McLean, you had specifically in your request, you said reply comments on PIMS, and we took that, and it looks like the other parties as well took that to more broadly cover cost recovery and PIMS. So that's what our reply comments cover that I'll summarize. And like I said, it looks like the other parties did the same thing. So if folks want to just pull up on their end the reply comments that we provided, I'll kind of go through each section again, just briefly to summarize points. And then, like I said, I've got a new table to share with folks at the end, and then I'll be happy to take some questions and I'll talk through this a little bit more. But our first point, we don't think, the utilities don't think that it can be oversold how successful these programs have been over the last decade plus. And I don't think anyone on this call, nor any party really is questioning how successful collectively we've all been in delivering these programs. And certainly there are a few parties that have said, well, why can't we make them better? And we absolutely agree with that. Why can't we make these programs better, more effective in this next round? We're excited about that, and I think everyone's excited about that. But at the same time, those at risk of oversimplifying over a decade of success, we boiled it down to 4 key points that we wanted to share to reiterate what drove success in the first place. And our point here is that we certainly don't want to discount any particular element that led us all collectively to have such success with these programs. And so I'll touch on the last bullet there. Is we believe with all of this, there is a justifiable cost that we all need to understand, eyes wide open, in terms of trying to achieve the same level of success that in another decade we're all, those of us who will hear, probably not me, but anyone younger on the phone, that we can all continue to enjoy the success that customer usage is controlled and down, and we've met or even exceeded Maryland's energy policy goals. So the next part, we wanted to very much reiterate that we respect the Commission's request to take a look at cost recovery, the unamortized balance, look at PIMS, look at some type of transition. And we very much appreciate MEA's first proposal and then OPC and how they sort of layered on a proposal onto that. We submitted questions to the broad group, and we got answers back. However, we believe that in terms of ensuring that we're respecting the Commission's request and making sure that we, as thoroughly as we possibly can, develop an analysis that gives the Commission eyes wide open, full fleshed out impacts on the forecasted costs and the various scenarios. We still feel like we don't have everything we need from MEA and OPC. Now, we acknowledge also that they were trying to develop a directional in nature type of analysis. But again, going back to that point that I made, which is we want to give the Commission as thorough and as detailed as we possibly can an analysis to show comparisons between, in this case, we compared the status quo to what we understood the OPC MEA analysis to be. So I'll leave the point there that we definitely are ready, willing, and able to continue to work with MEA and OPC to continue to flush out a bit more detail on their proposal. so that we can fully respect the nature of the proposal and present the analysis as accurately as possible. We did do the analysis, though, based on the assumptions that we understood and that what we would do as well, and we offered that, and I'll put that chart up in a second as well. The next part of our comments cover just, again, a reiteration, and we've done this before, but just kind of hearkening back to 08 and what we did as a body, as an entity, and a group of folks that saw this incredible opportunity to better manage our customers' energy use and meet, back then it was Governor O'Malley's 15 by 15 Empower goals. And there were a lot of thoughtful discussions. I shared that a couple of weeks ago, many of whom are on the call participated in those discussions to develop a cost recovery method that really accounted for a number of elements, pros and cons, but a number of elements, be it either a short cost recovery period or a long cost recovery period, to try to minimize any volatility, to try to match the investments that customers were making with the way they paid for those investments and the return that they were getting from those investments. So I won't go into any more detail, but we provided some pretty specific points around the status quo versus the OPC MEA proposal. So if I may, Judge, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. I want to just go over the chart. So it looks like we have some success. Did folks see the chart that we provided? Annual residential.
We got it, Chris. And I don't know if I said it in the beginning, but I am recording this just for historical purposes. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Okay. So regarding the chart that we provided, again, going back to my comments before of making sure that we provide the commission with a as thorough analysis as possible, eyes wide open decision in terms of what the pros and cons are of these scenarios. And in this particular case, we compared the status quo with what we believe to be the MEA OPC proposal, which would have us take the 10-year unamortized balance, put that in a particular bucket, and amortize it over 10 years, the unamortized balance at that point at 2023, and moving forward programs. And we provided this table that is just specific, but I think it certainly probably relates to all the utilities. But this shows the BGE electric and power surcharge impact. And this chart, I think, does also mirror what MEA/OPC provided in their charts as well, just in terms of visually, you can kind of see the differences. And what's most important for us is the impact that this will have on the customer bill and the Empower surcharge bill. And you can see right off the bat in 2024, there's about a 17% increase in the surcharge. And this is just BGE electric surcharge. This is just calculated annual surcharge for customers. And you can see the gap here between each of these years until we finally get out to 2034, where that gap is closed and it actually drops below what the customers are currently paying. And you know, this gap concerns us, especially when you look at it over the course of 10 plus years, how that will impact our customers, especially in light of the fact that we're about to move into a whole new realm of a new goal and potentially new expenses, new investments associated with Empower achieving a GA abatement goal. So we're particularly concerned, and we've voiced these concerns, uncertainty associated with that brand new goal, and what levers, I said that a couple of weeks ago, what sort of levers we can push and pull to make that goal and at the same time, potentially having the customer pay a significantly higher amount of surcharge. And by the way, this just assumes costs in 2023 would be flatlined all the way out. And we, of course, anticipate that there would likely be, and we don't, of course, know the outcome of the potential study, but I think it's all fair to say that costs potentially certainly could be higher. So the difference here could even be more stark.
Right.
So lastly, just to sort of close out.
Excuse me, Chris,
Yes.
I think before you lose that chart, Jim had his hand up.
Sure.
Thanks, Your Honor. Thanks, Chris. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. Quick question. So I understand what you're trying to illustrate here, and I'm not at all questioning the comparison. But to be accurate, if the programs, let's say 2034 was the last year of program implementation, wouldn't the green line continue for another 5 years, declining a bit each year until it was, until there was no more surcharge impact, whereas the blue line would not continue? Is that accurate? Do I understand it right?
Let me see if I understand your question. So if we were to just simply stop the programs, is that what you're proposing? Is that what would happen to these lines if we stop the programs in 2023 and then just have the amortization period continue out?
That's my question, but I was thinking in 2034, so that you have this impact, OPC MEA proposal pays off the amortization balance by 2034, and then what happens after that?
Yeah, so I think if the program's closed out in 2034, you would continue to see, because you still have those 5-year amortization periods being paid down, you would eventually see that line continue to, its path would be downward in nature, if I question.
Yes, but it would go on for another 5 years, more or less.
Yes. Yep.
Got it. Yep, that's what I thought. Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Sure. So just to close out my comments, if you look at this gap that we have here, what we wanted to do is take a look at that across the state of Maryland. What that look like for all customers, for all utilities. And hopefully you see me scrolling down to the next chart. Can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what we did here was we took every utility, basically that analysis, that line chart that I just provided, and showed that gap in tabular form and totaled it up across the state. So what this is that same comparison in column A of the status quo with in labeled B, the 10-year amortization and the expense with programs moving forward beginning in 2024. We took the difference, and this is a blended of all customer classes, and again, all utilities, all Empower utilities, and combining electric and gas. And what you can see here is the difference between the status quo and what all customers would be paying annually in their Empower surcharge, again, with the assumptions that we can certainly provide. And to be clear too, I'm happy to, and I will send this out to the entire group afterwards for any additional questioning or analysis with this particular table and how we put it together. But you can see the difference here is that it's quite significant. In the first year alone, over $124 million we would be asking our customers to pay for with the MEA OPC proposal versus the status quo proposal. And we took that balance and added it, made it cumulative. And what's even more stark is that if you go all the way out to 2033, it's well over $500 million that would represent the difference between the status quo today, what we would be asking our customers to pay in their surcharge, versus the other proposal that's on the table now. And that runs us out to 2043. Again, assuming a number of elements that we're happy to share in terms of the assumptions, but it's generally assuming program costs stay the same. We think that this is a very stark directional result. It's as accurate as we could make it given the information we have now. I'm sorry that we were not able to provide this ahead of time. I think I said this earlier, and just to reiterate, these are complex analyses. This was just made available late yesterday, and again, I'm happy to send it out. But I think it's also indicative of the challenge of trying to develop scenarios that make sense, that are as accurate as they can be, that are as realistic as they can be. To go back to my point, which I want to reiterate, we're very respectful of the Commission's order and understand we're here to look at how best to recover these costs, how best to minimize the impact to our customers, how best to weigh the pros and cons of a short-term perspective versus a long-term perspective. And all that's to say, ultimately, the utilities are continuing to look at this. We've looked at a number of other scenarios. We continue to look at other scenarios and continue very much to seriously interpret the Commission's order and try to develop something that I think we could all live with and like. We will be providing, as we work through this analyses, we will be providing this for others. We know that this future programming work group timing has an end to it, but we want to try to provide something as soon as possible in additional scenarios. But it is complicated, and these scenarios take time. The last points that I want to make is just the PIM component, and that's the last section in our submittal, our reply comments. It's just that the PIM that we're proposing, this goes back to the uncertainty that I was talking about before, and we continue to be concerned about the goals and a new GHG abatement framework. And so we would very much appreciate having a PIM applied to us in the third year of the next cycle. And that way, that gives us an opportunity for the first couple of years to know exactly, or certainly not exactly, but know better how to implement the programs, what challenges we'll be facing, implement new programs and get them up and running if that's what ultimately we find. That certainly gives us also more time to assess the outcome of the potential study and what opportunities that potential study may provide for us. So with that, I'll close out my comments and take any questions if there are any questions. And again, thank you all for the opportunity to review this analysis.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Who's got questions or comments? Nicole.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. Nicole Zeichner on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. I guess I have a few questions for the utilities in terms of their proposal. So we recognize the success of the Empower program. We don't dispute that. But what we find hard to justify is the fact that Maryland utilities are earning between 4 and 8 times what utilities in other better performing states are earning. And it's also hard to understand a PIM on top of those earnings. So I guess first, it looks like there's no real proposal to address the balance at this point. Is that right? The utilities don't yet have a proposal to address the unamortized balance?
We don't yet have a detailed proposal to address the unamortized balance. We wanted to certainly thoughtfully assess the other proposals compared to the status quo and give, again, a thorough and thoughtful analysis. But I reiterate, we continue to review other alternatives. At this point, nothing has given us a good sense of balancing. And as we all know, this is very complicated, given us a good balance between short-term benefit and long-term benefit, short-term pros and cons versus long-term pros and cons.
And I guess, you mentioned in your comments that there are some, I guess the utilities raised the concern that there are some issues with MEA's data and OPC's data. what exactly is missing in the utilities opinion? There's mention of program costs that are not included, and then of course for MEA's position, unamortized balances that were not included. But would the utilities be willing to give us or circulate a list of exactly what they believe is missing from our proposal and MEA's proposal?
Yeah, certainly. And Judge McLean, if you would like to get into some more of the details, certainly up to you. I would call on a couple of my colleagues from the utilities that evaluated the model specifically, and they could probably share some more detail. Like, I'll reiterate as well that we certainly are ready, willing, and able to provide additional questions to try to come closer to ensuring that the modeling is as accurate as it can be at this point, and also knowing which assumptions we would use to keep the analysis fair between one versus the other.
Yeah, please, if someone can answer Nicole's questions, that'd be great.
So I'd call on either, well, actually any of the utility representatives in the rates area, either perhaps Brian or April, any comments?
So this is April from BGE. I would just say the first thing is that the information is dated. I mean, this was using 2019 data actuals and some forecasts for 2020. So one of the questions we had asked MEA is, would they be willing to update it with more recent data? So the analysis that Chris had on his screen is using forecasted data for 2023. As far as BGE, some of the values weren't matching the actual 2019 filings that we did. I would have to go back and specifically call out what they are, but BGE was also missing the gas efficiency program that was completely not included in the MEA analysis.
And is that something that maybe could be not necessarily right now, but circulated? And I guess the other question is, would the utilities be willing to run the numbers with those, what they believe to be the accurate information? And if the program proposals were to come out similar after the more updated numbers are run, would the utilities then agree to OPC's proposal?
Yeah, I think we would certainly be committed to continuing the analysis to ensure that's as accurate as possible, but we are not willing or ready at this point to make any commitment on any particular alternative proposal. As I said, we continue to flesh out other alternatives, but we also, again, respect the Commission's order and certainly respect OPC MEA's proposal, and want to evaluate it as clearly and as objectively and as accurately as possible.
And I guess the thing is, we could, before someone undergoes or incurs the cost of redoing this entire analysis, we just want to know if it's worth it. We want to know if that's going to change the utilities' position, or if the utilities are willing to do the analysis, and then we could look at the new numbers.
I would offer up that we can certainly provide additional questions to reach greater clarity and accuracy, and then I think we can also take it back to determine, how rapidly we could do that analysis. As I said before, this is complicated analysis, and we want to make sure it's as clear and clean as possible. So may we get back to you on how long it might take, and also, you've requested additional questions, so we could certainly provide those additional questions as well.
Thank you.
Dylan had a question in the chat. If you could circulate all the inputs and calculations used to produce your charts and tables, is that something that's possible, sir?
Yeah, and I'll just make sure that the utilities are okay with that. I think they would be. We were prepared when we provided the table to know that there certainly would be questions, and we'd want to share that. So certainly, I don't see any issue unless any of the utilities jump in and say there is an issue one way or the other or whatever, but I doubt there would be.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, anybody else have questions?
Your Honor, I do have some additional questions, but I don't mind waiting if
No,
others want to.
You got the floor.
So I guess one question we have is there was concern, the utilities raised a concern with the greenhouse gas abatement-based goal structure. Now, I think we can agree that in order to calculate greenhouse gas abatement savings, we do have to know program savings overall. Is that right? Energy savings overall?
Yes.
Okay, so it's more of the principle that's an issue. It's not that the data is not there, right? I think we can agree that the data is there. The utilities are just concerned that the goal structure is different than what the work group had been moving towards. Is that accurate?
Yes, and I guess the short answer is yes. But at the same time, and I don't mean to overemphasize it, but with any of us, we probably would look at ourselves in terms of any new goal that we're about to undertake professionally. With it is inherent uncertainty. There are elements that are uncertain, and we absolutely want to have every opportunity to achieve, if not exceed, these goals. We certainly believe that they would likely be more aggressive and more comprehensive than what we have today. They may or may not be, but as I said too, what levers can we pull and push? What programs? What marketing levels? What new requirements we would have in order to achieve these. None of us like to be in front of the commission telling them how we haven't made the goals. While that's not a key thing, obviously, that drives us, certainly, but we want to be successful collectively as a body and successful together. And so, that's really the broader perspective of what we were trying to get across in terms of the concern.
And that makes sense. And if the goal structure was completely weighted for greenhouse gas abatement, would that change the utilities position? If that's something that the stakeholders would agree to, how would the utilities feel about that?
I'd have to take that back to the utilities. I'd also offer up any utility comments if anyone else wants to chime in on that particular proposal. I'd say it's overall hard to say right now. We could certainly take that back as a concept or an idea.
And then
Nicole, can I just clarify? I think you said goal structure in there, but to be clear, the question is for a PIM, having a PIM be primarily or exclusively GHG based, would that change the utilities position on what OPC is talking about? That just to be clear, that's the question.
Yeah, that helps, Dylan. Thank you. And I guess I would say that anytime you make any goal a little bit more specific and a little bit more simplistic, and remove other variables, I would say certainly directionally that makes it less concerning in terms of our ability to achieve that particular goal. So whether it's this proposal or some variation, certainly simpler goals, less complex goals, we would certainly entertain those as well.
And I do have a question about the chart that you showed, the graph. Did the utilities model the utilities proposal with the PIM on top of the costs of the earnings from the unamortized balance?
No, we did not. And I guess that kind of gets to and it's a very fair question, that gets to the complexity of the model. We could run many different scenarios of a PIM and different PIMs. So, the short answer is no. In order to develop a directional profile or picture, really the inherent proposal at hand, which is status quo versus the 10-year unamortized, and then moving to an. It's a good question because time that would take.
All right. And then in terms of the surcharge, if the budget remains the same from Power, do the utilities agree that the only way to pay down the unamortized balance is through an increase in the surcharge? I guess, can we agree on that point?
So state your question one more time. I want to make sure I answer it accurately.
So I guess, can we all agree that the only way to pay down the unamortized balance is using a surcharge increase at some point?
Well, I guess the short answer is yes. However, we continue to, as I've said before, continue to review other alternatives. You know, I think if the alternatives were simple, we probably would have come up with those alternatives at this point. It is complex. I don't mean to you know, overemphasize that, but yes, I think the short answer is yes.
And when we looked at the graph, that graph that you showed previously with the status quo model versus OPC's proposal, what is the estimated surcharge impact per month for residential customers between, so let's just look at that 2024 where the gap is largest, although I would say it's not significantly large, but it's large. What's the residential impact for that gap in 2024?
So what that, if I understand your question, what that shows is simply BGE's residential electric customer gap between what they would pay under status quo at, I believe, keep me honest here, April, too, 841 kWh per customer assumed versus the MEA OPC proposal. So that's just that specific gap. It's about 17% is the difference. Does that answer your question?
I guess, can you estimate the residential surcharge impact for that difference in 2024?
Like a monthly surcharge number.
Oh, a monthly surcharge number. April, help me out. I assume we probably could do that. Again, that would probably be additional timing for the analysis, but and we
give me a
probably.
second. So monthly is about $1.13
Yeah, we work.
for the average customer. And again, that's only electric. We'd have to do the same thing on the gas side.
Thank you. And I want to, if someone else has a question, someone else can feel free to jump in. I have a few more questions.
No,
but I can
this is Brian Talley from PHI, Pepco, and Delmarva. And I just wanted to add on to what April said. It just depends. Part of the answer to your question depends on the legal entity or the jurisdiction that we're in, and it depends on the customer class and obviously the year. But for ours, or I would say Delmarva's, is approximately, I think in 2024, it'd be about a little over $2. It'd go up about 32%. It's $2.13. And I believe, and actually Pepco's would be of similar nature. It'd be going up those similar percentages.
Thank you.
And one suggestion too, you know, these questions, I'm doing my best to answer the questions, but we'd be happy to, if you want to submit questions through this proceeding, you know, and share the questions, we'd be happy to respond to those questions.
Thank you.
All right. I'll give you a break there, Nicole. Dan's got his hand up. I promise I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Dan Hood with the commission staff. Sorry, I'm a little late to the meeting. I had a doctor's appointment with one of my kids. Good news, there's no flu, COVID, or strep. So it's just a bad cold for him. So being a little bit late, I'm sorry, Chris, but I was looking at your chart, and I guess the one question I have on that chart is, it says electric and power surcharge. Is that demand response and energy efficiency?
You're muted, Chris.
Sorry. Good morning, Dan. Which chart are you talking about? The table that I provided at the end,
Yeah,
or
it's
the
the
line?
table from the filing. I guess it's on page 3. It's the annual residential BGE electric and power surcharge table.
It's all Empower programs. So for us, it's the demand response and energy efficiency and smart energy rewards.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, April.
Anybody else before we turn it over to Nicole again? Nicole, you're up.
Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. So I guess another question we have is, I know that there was a concern raised over the impacts per rate class. If we were to, well, first, I guess, have the utilities modeled that? Do the utilities know what the actual impacts would be per rate class with OPC's proposal?
Yeah, I think generally we have. Again, I would ask anyone from
I
the.
can respond. This is April.
Thank you.
We've focused on residential because residential has always been kind of the focus from staff and the commission, how much it's going to impact the residential customer. We can split that. If you want all 4 classes for BGE, we can do that. It's going to take time. Because again, we have to model each individual class.
And do you have preliminary data on that you might be able to send out now?
We've only done total and then residential.
Okay.
If you want it split down further, I mean, you can just subtract total and resi to get C&I, but again, the different classes are each going to have different rate impacts depending on what rate schedule they're on.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess I realize the utilities raised concerns over numbers, but if these evaluations were done again, and if we had a complete picture, what the utilities would consider a more complete picture, fundamentally, do the utilities agree with the idea of having Empower earnings linked to performance?
Sorry, Nicole, you broke up just the last part. You said fundamentally, and then sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
Sorry. Fundamentally, do the utilities agree with having Empower earnings linked to performance?
I would have to take that back to the utilities. It's elements of delivering these programs and our continued commitment to deliver them successfully, and how that's done. We have reiterated our points about how this current construct was set up and why it was set up, and we're still grappling with the pros and cons of each of these scenarios. I would have to take that again, as I suggested earlier, perhaps, is that we see that question in writing and provide you a more thorough response to it.
Thank you. I think that's everything I have right now. Thank you. Thank you for answering all my questions.
Sure.
Thank you. Jim.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates. Chris, sorry, follow on really to Nicole's question. At least it popped into my head this way. OPC has pointed out in their analysis that the Maryland utilities are earnings, I think, didn't Nicole say 4 to 8 times the amount as a percentage on their energy efficiency programs compared with other leading utilities who are perhaps achieving even greater savings. I mean, and I know you're going to have to take this back, but I mean, does that seem reasonable to the utilities? Do you have any perspective on that? Would the utilities agree to a more modest earning on the Empower portfolio that would be more in line with other jurisdictions? Thank you.
Sure. Good morning, Jim. Thanks for your question, and definitely not for me to say, and not to opine the outcome of that particular question. We can certainly take that back but I still, I understand the spirit of your question and the point of your question. I still go back to the success that we've had over a decade plus. There are many elements that are associated with that success, and I think we need to be clear that what we're proposing and what elements led to a decade plus of success with all of us collectively.
Thank you.
All right, Dylan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dylan Voorhees with the EIC, working on behalf of OPC. Chris, a couple more follow-up questions. And I appreciate that you are not in a position to sort of speak for everybody sort of in response to all of these questions. I think some of these fundamentals were part of OPC's proposals and comments and propositions that were filed almost a month ago, including this last question sort of about performance basis. There should be a performance basis for earnings. And I just admit it's sort of frustrating to not have a sort of a position on that as a fundamental idea. And it I think can be separated from what is the surcharge impact, because you could have performance-based earnings that results in the same cost of programs. There's sort of some of that principle was used in how OPC sort of picked some of the numbers, but those numbers can change. So I think as you hopefully can answer that question, it's separating out so what's a reasonable surcharge for ratepayers, and you've raised concern about pay down for that reason, from this fundamental question of should the earnings be performance based. So another opportunity to sort of opine on that a little bit more, but as you answer that question, which hopefully you can, because I think that's a fundamental part of OPC's proposal, and understanding the utility's position on that principle is helpful. The second comment or question is more of an actual question, and again, you may not be able to answer now, but I think it's just seems fundamental to your position on paying down the balance and the surcharge. And Nicole asked, I think, a useful question, and I think it's clear to me too. I mean, at some point, you don't get to pay down that balance unless you pay a little bit more, on every month. That's true of my credit card and any kind of other debt. What level of surcharge impact do the utilities think might be reasonable as part of a solution? If $1 a month is too much, and it looks, if that was the April said $1.13 for BG&E, somebody said of course the other utilities would be a little bit different. If it's $1 in 2024, it's going to be less than $1, probably half that, or 50 cents a month in many of those years, just sort of eyeballing your chart. It sounds like the position is that's too much for the utility. They think that's too much of an impact to pay down the balance. What impact might be acceptable to pay down the balance?
Yeah, good morning, Dylan. Thank you for the question. It's a fair question. Again, I can't opine what would be an amount. We certainly don't have a specific amount that we think is fair or unfair. As you well know, there's no particular. I think with gas prices today, right now, as an example, do we think that that's everybody has an idea of what they're willing to pay additional for whatever other elements that are going on. That's really, really hard. I think where we're approaching it is just we understand the challenge, we understand the charge, we understand what the commission has put forth for us to do, and we are thoughtfully trying to develop a scenario or a couple of scenarios that I think balance that short-term potential impact to a long-term impact. I hope that these programs are here for many, many years and continue to have great returns. We've already pointed out with the statewide level that these programs are cost effective. The benefits that are returning to our customers are greater than the costs. As long as we continue to maintain that, I'm excited about the next decade of what this will deliver for Marylanders. But to specifically tell you an amount, and again, I can't say that specific amount what is the difference? What we're trying to do is thoughtfully consider various scenarios that we think could work potentially, and we just haven't struck on that particular scenario as yet.
Okay, I guess let me close with maybe one or two sort of data requests. But I think that the mention of sort of, well, the programs are cost effective, and as as long as that continues to be true, that's good news. Of course, that's good news, but that doesn't justify any utility earning or any surcharge impact, right? So it's important that the programs are cost effective and return benefits, but OPC's pointed out, well, that doesn't justify any amount of utility earnings, no matter how big, as long as that remains the case. You've pointed out, well, that doesn't justify any level of surcharge. There's some surcharge that's okay and some amount that's too high, or so the programs being cost effective is great news, but those other considerations about what's fair to ask what's fair to ask ratepayers to pay on their monthly bill, and what's fair to, for the utilities to earn, those are distinct questions we're trying to figure out. Can you please, following up on Nicole's question, as you circulate those tables and some of the inputs and assumptions and the calculations there, either at that time or follow up on that, can you do what she sort of alluded to, which is also the PIM proposal from the utilities? Can you produce what that would look like as well? And following up on Jim's question earlier, can you extend those out 5 or whatever the appropriate number of years is, with an assumption of program ending, in order to get maybe a more of an apples to apples comparison between a pay down the balance scenario and a perpetuate the balance scenario? Are those, I don't think those should be showstoppers, but if you could do either or both of those, that would be really helpful to I think what you're asking for, which is to give a full picture of the sort of comparison for the commission.
So let me suggest this, which I think we talked a little bit about too. We'll be happy to respond to a written question if you wouldn't mind, because I want to make sure we're responsive,
okay,
and as clear as we possibly can be. So we would really appreciate a written question, and then we can respond accordingly. And if we can't answer it specifically due to time, or at least give you a little bit more insight as to how much time it would take to develop an additional scenario or respond to your question, we would love to have that opportunity.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.
All right, thanks, Dylan. Anybody else have any questions for Chris for the utilities? Babatunde, then Dan.
Hello, Chris. This is Babatunde Idrisu from MEA.
Good morning.
Good morning. Your questions you asked me a couple of weeks back, based on the goals, you raised the question about focusing more on the GHG savings for the PIMs as opposed to having energy savings. I'm not sure I'm getting the question right now, but about energy savings from the customer bill, right? You wanted it to be based on programmatic energy savings, something like that. Is that correct, Chris?
Sorry, Bob.
So,
Good morning. I'm not quite understanding the question.
yeah, so the design of the PIMs, on the design of the PIMs, one of the things you raised based on our on the scenario that MEA had given to you was the fact that it was based on the 2% electricity savings, and you had raised that you would rather prefer that it's based on energy savings, since the program is looking more towards GHG abatement. You raised the concern about focusing more. You you wanted us to focus more on the savings, the energy savings from the programs themselves, as opposed to what is in the consumer bill. Am I framing it correctly?
Let me turn this out to another utility representative. I'm just not recalling specific point. In fact, I just went back to our comments and tried to find that point while you were asking the question, Bolotunde, and I certainly want to be responsive to your question.
Okay. I
else
should tell
have
them
Taylor, did you want to jump in?
No, I actually have a question for after all of this. That this is
Okay.
beyond my pay grade. Just
All
kidding, but
Very good. I got you.
Okay. All right. So my question on that will be, will the utilities be favorable to PIMs based on electricity savings goals or energy savings goals, as well as, of course, GHG abatement goals?
I think we are, just because of the fact that the GHG abatement goal, which I think was pointed out before, you'd have to have energy savings as one of the basis points for ultimately GHG abatement. So yes.
Okay.
Short answer.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Dan, you still have a question, sir?
More of a comment, I guess. Thank you, Dan Hurley, Commission staff. I guess my comment is that if somehow it's decided that the status quo cost recovery stays in place, and we're in a different world than we were for the last 10 years within power, with the fuel inputs have been pretty consistently flat to small increases. Now we're seeing some major increases, and it could put pressure on surcharge recovery. It could put pressure on just prices of electricity, and we're going to be looking at total bill impact. So I can't tell you whether or not the commission is how much they're going to consider all aspects of Maryland state policy as far as how much a surcharge impact should be. But let's say we do have this status quo continues, hypothetically. I don't see why we would need to even consider having a PIM if that's the cost recovery we're going to go. If that's the cost recovery method going forward, why would we even consider having a PIM on top of that? Kind of a comment, and maybe a question is in there too, if anyone cares to respond.
I was giving anyone else an opportunity to respond if they want to, but I would just say on the merit of the question, Dan, I agree completely. It's a fair question in the face of all this, and I think it goes back to highlighting the complexity of this decision, the importance of this decision, and just kind of what we pointed out before too is overall uncertainty of a new goal structure, and then ultimately how we achieve that goal structure in light of all the other things going on too, that we pointed out there. We're entering a new realm on many facets, and we just want to be responsive to the commission's request and be as clear and as eyes wide open in terms of the thoroughness of our comparisons of these options that we're putting before them. So thanks for that comment, Dan.
Lindsay, you want to jump in?
Yes, thanks, Your Honor. Lindsay North from PHI, and just jumping in to help Chris. So, and Chris, really appreciate you taking the lead here. I think just to provide a little bit of a perspective on this, I think we were considering sort of all of these items as a package. And so that's, I think, where the discussion around the PIM came forward. I think if we were to look at the status quo, the status quo doesn't necessarily have a PIM now. So I think that's open discussion. But I think if we're looking at changing things, then that's where the context of the PIM was really from our perspective. I hope that helps clarify, Dan. And other utilities should feel free to jump in and add to that or disagree if you would like to.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's see, we got Babatunde and then Nicole.
This is Babatunde from MEA. Chris, I don't know if you gave a date on this. You said you were going to provide the data that you discussed earlier. I don't know when you said you were going to do that.
Sure. So the tables, we're prepared to send those out immediately. If that's what you're specifically asking about, the table I shared at the end, yeah, we can send those out immediately following this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That was an easy one. Nicole.
Yes, Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. So I guess to make sure we're clear, the utilities are suggesting that a PIM is warranted because we're switching to a greenhouse gas-based goal structure, and they feel that they should be further compensated on top of what they're earning on the unamortized balance in order to meet that goal.
Again, I appreciate your question. I wouldn't say it's as stark as that. I would say that we are, again, to be responsive to the commission, we are offering up different scenarios, different elements that would that are responsive to the commission. As we've talked about already, there are pros and cons to each of those. You know, I think we've intimated in some of the earlier discussions too that PIMs do concern us, of course, because of all the associated uncertainty. I would say just as a PIM as a concept does concern us in terms of, like I said, uncertainty moving forward. We're still open to suggestions and further discussion about the usefulness of a PIM. Kind of going back to Dan's comment, you know, if the commission deems that we look at holistically what customers are going to be paying for moving forward, how the bills might be impacted, then I think we you know, it's incumbent upon us to respond to that and share additional insights as to the pros and cons of a PIM specifically.
And I guess, thank you. And I guess I would ask, this balance issue has been going on for a long time, and the utilities, no one has come up with a solution for this except a surcharge. So isn't by delaying a surcharge just increasing the balance and maybe delaying the inevitable? I mean, I guess, is there a point where we say this is a solution to this problem and let's figure out how to do it?
Well, I think that's what this proceeding is and is attempting to do. And I think that the past filings that we've made, the past work groups that have been going on for several years now, actually, you know, we're attempting to be responsive and develop some kind of scenario that weighs short-term pros and cons versus long-term pros and cons of how to invest in and you know, achieve Maryland's energy policy. That's what we're trying to do ultimately, is achieve Maryland's energy policies. How can we best do that? Ensure that we are matching benefits with costs in an appropriate way, so our customers say, yeah, I want to participate. Yeah, I'm okay with this surcharge in this amount because I understand the benefits that I get. You know, one of the things I've done many times with customers is when I'm promoting these programs in front of them, I say, I point out the Empower surcharge and I say, this is how we're able to pay for these programs. I implore you, participate, not only because it benefits your household, it benefits you, it benefits your business, but you are paying for it as well. All you have to do is participate with a program or two, and you more than offset that surcharge. You know, that's herein lies the complexity. You look at that particular scenario and you can get a customer on your side and participate. You know, where it becomes challenging is the longevity of all this. Where are we headed next? What new pressures on costs overall will occur as we continue to try to expand this, do even better, achieve even greater accomplishments and even more broad Maryland energy policies.
Thank you.
All right, Andrew.
Yeah, I was actually going to jump in with what Nicole's question was. was, are we just delaying the inevitable? I guess from my perspective, and again, I don't represent Chris or PHR or anybody else, but you look at that and the question is, and it's a legitimate question in my opinion, is it worth it to transition at this point? Now that you've gone down this road of amortizing balances, is it worth it when you look at the fact that you don't flip into a net positive until 2043? And that's in nominal dollars. That's not in any kind of discounted dollars either. So once you factor in the time value of money, it really is a legitimate question. Is it worth it? And I think we've already heard, I think Mr. Gravatt mentioned, I mean, we don't even know that programs are going to be going in 2034 or 2044 in order to experience all of these savings. So, I'm not saying it's not worth it. I'm saying I think it's a legitimate question whether it is. And I had one other, this kind of is going back into the archives here, but as we've had this conversation and OPC keeps bringing up utility earnings, Dylan, do you have the calculations behind that bar chart that you showed a while back, showing that utility earnings for Maryland were above 20%? That doesn't sound right to me. So I'd like to see those numbers, if you don't mind.
Happy to do that. That number is pretty easy, and I don't think there's a lot of dispute about those numbers. It's not typically presented. It's not 20% rate of return.
So I know that
it's as a percentage of the program budgets. So the program budgets are about $300 million right now. I think looking back over the last 2 years, you could see that, the total combined return to the utilities approximately, I don't have the number right in front of me, about $60 million. I mean, Chris or somebody else, you can tell me it's not off by $10 million. It's off maybe a couple $1 million. So it's, 60 out of 30, that's 20%. So I think as that number is not, I don't think there should be much.
But are you comparing the earnings on 6 or 7 years worth of prior expenditures to 1 year program? I mean, I just like to see it. I'm not asking you to explain it to me now. I just like to see it and come to my own conclusions, if at all possible.
That's fine. It's only particularly useful data point in comparison to other states,
but that's what you've hung your hat on, though, right? That we're out of line with other states. So
yes,
I mean,
I'm happy to provide that for you to look at. I think that I think it is an apples to apples comparison in terms of how much are the utilities earning, and it's year after year after year in relation to the size of the program budgets. And so I think that's the metric. And as you may know, most other states expense programs, and so those utilities are just, or other program administrators are just earning that, whatever that PIM is in that year. And then the states that amortize, and a number of states do, a couple of states do, there are earnings based on that amortization as well, and I've included those. And those are, those utilities don't have an enormous balance, and so they're earning 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever percent return they're earning in an annual year. So the reason for that very high number is because of the unamortized balance, and the point is not that money isn't owed to the utilities because it was borrowed. Yes, it was borrowed. But is it sustainable, and is it out of line on a year over year basis? I think that's sort of what we're trying to get at.
I fully understand your point. I'd like to see the numbers for myself.
Yep.
And were you ever able to, by the way, since we had that last meeting, were you ever able to come up with any data on whether you thought overall our savings are delivered more expensively than these other states? Or, because I did have that question then, and I know no one had looked at it, but did we ever come up with a position on that? I'll admit I haven't been able to look at it. So,
well, I encourage you to look at, so ACEEE's report cards have data that on spending and on savings, and you can get a general sense of that. And I think what you find looking at that broadly is that there's not a lot of variation across strong performing states in terms of the actual program cost to achieve a kilowatt hour savings. I don't have any reason to believe that Maryland's program cost to achieve a kilowatt hour is substantially out of line with other, strong performing states.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Andrew, you're with Washington Gas, correct?
Yes, sir. Sorry, my apologies.
It's okay. No problem.
Sorry, Judge.
We got a couple hands up, Babatunde, and then Lindsay. And Jim, I think you had your hand up too. We'll get to you.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is Babatunde from MEA. Chris, I was wondering, I think Nicole might have said this earlier, if the utilities have, whether they have a proposal to deal with the balance, or there's something in the works that the utilities are discussing to deal with the unamortized balance.
Yeah, the short answer is we continue to toil over this. It's not easy. And if we have something that we can carry forward, we would absolutely provide it. We would have provided it in the past as well. It's complicated. This is I've said it probably too many times and people are done listening to me, but just trying to weigh short-term versus long-term impacts and a bit getting to perhaps what Dan was talking about too, is just looking more broadly at what we're asking our customers to do over the coming months and years in light of many other elements going on, and not just specifically that certainly, but many elements and uncertainty of goals. There's a lot to address here to go back to thoughtfully developing an alternative that we can weigh and be comfortable with, and then of course going back to thoughtfully responding to the Commission's request to give them as accurate scenarios as we possibly can so they can make the best decision.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, Lindsay and then Jim.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lindsay North from PHI. So I was just curious, and just listening to the conversation here, Nicole, if you had asked Chris a question about what if we had considered what would be a reasonable amount of increase to the surcharge, and I was kind of curious if you guys had come up with something of your own, and if you can't answer it, right in this moment, that's totally understandable, but be curious if you could send that out. And I can send it to you as a question via email if that would be easier.
And I guess, do you mean, we do have our proposal on the table. Do you mean, and that does have surcharge estimates in it. Do you mean something besides that?
Do those include the monthly impacts by rate class, or, and forgive me if those do, and we've been focusing on other elements of it, so I've lost sight of that specific piece.
I believe that we have, and Dylan, feel free to join in here, but I believe that we still need to do some evaluation between rate classes, but I think there is an estimate contained, and I'll let Dylan explain that. Thank you. Oh, Dylan, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, Lindsay, the proposal that was circulated does include a monthly estimated surcharge, change in surcharge for the OPC's proposal compared to the status quo. It's assumed it uses an all-in total empower, so it's not based on individual rate classes. I will have to go back and look and see the numbers for BG&E residential compared to what we did for, again, it was all utilities, all rate classes together. I don't expect that they're broadly inconsistent. I think the maximum sort of estimated impact in the OPC analysis was a little bit higher, again, and that may fit with somebody from PHI might have said that maybe the initial impact would have been a little bit higher, maybe closer to $2. So that's very generally consistent with what OPC modeled initially, which was $1 to $2 for some years, a little bit under $1 for a month for other years. So, OPC, I don't think went through the process of saying like, what is the, what's the red line on but that as Nicole said, that proposal is kind of on the table. It's a conceptual proposal. It was based on that analysis, which we concur uses data from a couple of years ago, but I don't think that updating that data from 2021, I don't think it changes dramatically the picture. And the picture is I won't sort of restate the overall concepts, but I don't think that it wasn't a proposal that this amount of surcharge is acceptable, but it was a proposal that if we do this and it looks broadly like this would be a good approach.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, and you see where I'm going. I think as we think about this, that's the part that we're trying to be cognizant of. It's like, what is the actual impact on the customers? I mean, these are big numbers that are being thrown out, and there's a lasting impact. So I appreciate you revisiting that. And if there's anything further you want to add on the reasonableness of what you think could be appropriate as an impact to customers by class, I think that would be helpful for us as we go back. And again, like as Chris has said, we're trying to make that balance happen. Like what isn't a reasonable approach, and I think that would be a helpful input for us. And I'll pause there to see if others have comments from the utility perspective.
But I think, Lindsay, the ball's in your court, because I think OPC has already said, here's a reasonable proposal. And here's a broad, here's a rough estimate. It was emphasis on the rough, capital R, the rough estimate. This is a reasonable starting point to work on the details. So that I think, and what I've heard from Chris and in the comments is, we did the math. It shows these numbers. I'm not sure they're radically different numbers. We saw the BG&E residential numbers. We did all total utilities, all classes, but they don't seem inconsistent. And what we heard is, well, that's too much to pay. So I think our question to you guys is, well, what do you think is not too much to pay in order to achieve the commission's direction to sort of deal with the balance? And it's not easy. And OPC, again, didn't look at it in terms of, okay, we're going to find that line under which it's okay, over which it's not okay. Like that's very difficult to do. But I think at some point, to be responsive to what the commission is asking about solutions on the balance, there needs to be some kind of proposal on the table.
Okay. Sounds like what you've proposed is what you're offering, and so we'll take that back and use it for what it is. And appreciate that, Dylan.
Well, I think maybe you guys have a lot more data. You have updated data. If you're and Chris has offered to send around those tables, so that's great. And maybe we'll have to look at them, but maybe we'll agree your numbers are the better numbers, but they're not answering the policy questions here, which is should the balance be paid off? Is there a reasonable amount of surcharge increase, a little bit of some short-term impact in order to get this larger benefit of paying down this balance? Should earnings be performance-based? Those are some fundamentals that we're still struggling, sort of not really hearing clear postures on. Thanks.
All right. Jim, you had your hand up, sir.
Thank you, sir. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. My hand was up before because I didn't know who Mr. Lawson was, and you asked him to identify himself, and I appreciate that. Thank you for saving me from doing that. I have a couple of, I don't know if they're requests or observations or questions. One is a request, which is, I think we're being quite myopic about talking about the surcharge impact. And is it $1 or $2? Because compared to what? How much of an increase is that? What is the surcharge now? I have a rough idea, but I think that I would suggest that needs to be part of the conversation, and not just the surcharge impact. I think isolating the surcharge doesn't provide really such a meaningful look at what the overall rates and bills are that customers are contending with. The last time that I did anything regarding everybody freaking out about the surcharge impact, and we kind of looked at the different components of the bills and found that the distribution investments the utilities were making were dwarfing the rate impact of the surcharge from Empower. So I suggest that that all be included in the discussion going forward so that there's some context. That's a request, right? And the other thing, I don't know if this is, it's kind of a request, but it's at least an observation. I've heard, Chris, and I know that this is sincere, a lot of discussion about concern about the impact on the ratepayers, on the customers. I totally trust that. But I haven't heard anybody say explicitly, and I don't think this is a bad thing to say this. I think it's part of the discussion here. We're also talking about how much the utility should earn, how much the shareholders should earn from these investments. But nobody's actually saying that out loud, or at least I'm missing it if they are. It's fair for the shareholders to earn something on these investments. But I think the question of how much should be part of the discussion. Otherwise, I'm not sure what we're doing. And then I just want to echo Dylan's request. I mean, my clients are supporting OPC's proposal because it's the most substantive proposal that we've seen to deal with the amortization balance. We haven't really seen anything else. We haven't seen anything from the utilities for dealing with that. So if you can put together some proposal, and I know it's complex, but I think that would really advance the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Andrew, you had your hand up,
Hey,
sir.
and I'm going to identify myself this time. Andrew Lawson from Washington Gas. Jim, to your first point, I completely sympathize with that. Although the thing I'd say is, right, the commission has focused on this particular, that's their direction here, right? I mean, all of the impacts we're talking about, right, $1 here, $2 here, in the grand scheme of the rest of the utility bill is not that big, right? I mean, if we're talking $5 a year for us, in year one to save you $1 a year in 2035. I mean, right, that's not that big in comparison to our bill. And the commission has decided to focus on this unamortized balance where, I mean, that's our whole business model, right? Is an unamortized balance. That's how we make money on our pipes. So we kind of have to do that, right? Don't we have to focus on this, even though it gets lost in the larger bill? That's what you're directed to do.
You have to focus on it, but I don't think the commission said, and don't provide us any other information to consider when we're looking at the surcharge impacts. And I think it's fair and respectful to the commission to put it in context. That's me. If I were a commissioner, I would be asking for that. But, it's up to these commissioners to ask for what they want. But I think it's respectful to include that personally in response to your question.
You should.
Thank you, gentlemen. Dylan.
So just wanted to go in on that. So Andrew, you don't have to earn for the Empower programs in the same way you earn for the pipes. You don't. That's.
I'm aware of that. We do that, and I'm aware of that.
Okay, so
and I'm aware that's what you want.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and that's how most folks do it. And OPC is proposed that there should be that the utilities should earn for running these programs. That's not universally the case, although it is clearly a best practice that utilities earn, that shareholders of IOUs earn some kind of basis for running programs and achieving excellence and achieving goals. I think there's not really a question, on that. And so how much should it be? What should the metric be? Should it be GHG? Should it be GHG plus something else? I mean, I think those are important details, but I think it's just important to acknowledge that there is another way, there is a common other way, and it can still include utility earnings. Yes, probably utility earnings that are more in line with what we see in other jurisdictions, but
I guess
And
that's
of
where I
course-
just get confused, right? I mean, we've already said that our savings aren't delivered more expensively than everyone else, and this has been going on for 12 to 15 years. At this point, if we were behaving badly, I think we'd know, right? I mean, we're trying to add all these new incentives to correct some behavior that doesn't exist, I think.
Well, when I said the program costs, the cost to achieve a kilowatt hour, I'm talking about the program cost. I'm not talking about the utility earnings. I suspect if you add the utility earnings into it, it would distort that answer, and you would find, yes, it is costing more in Maryland to achieve money because we're paying the program costs and we're paying these annual earnings on the balance. Then yeah, that is kind of the point. That is a lot more, and it's needlessly more. I mean, I understand that's a position, and it's adverse to the financial interests of the shareholder. So I understand that's the difference of perspective there.
All right, April.
Hi, April O'Neill from BGE. I guess this question's for Dylan or Jim. You keep saying that Empower should have a different earnings than distribution investments. And I guess I just want to understand why you think that Empower investments should be treated differently. The Empower investments are to save you from having to do other distribution investments. So in my mind, they're on the same playing field.
I can give a quick answer to that, April. I think the primary reason that sort of for justification of a difference is that although they are avoiding some of those expenses, they're also avoiding many other kinds of expenses. They're avoiding fuel expenses, and they're also not actual investments in capital that the utilities then own. It is more analogous to a program. They are programs. They do provide incentives to people, but it is not an investment in utility capital, and it's offsetting of a variety of costs, including deferred capital. So I think that's sort of fundamentally why in most states energy efficiency program costs are treated differently. I think it's important that there be kind of a policy attributes when you have a utility administrator. It's important to acknowledge and find appropriate ways to sort of mitigate other features that could distort, investment decisions by the utilities, so that you're not putting a thumb on the scale for distribution side investments. But that does not mean that you have to treat on a cost basis those investments in exactly the same way in order to get good outcomes from a utility program administrator. And one of the ways that many states have done that is to give the utilities a performance incentive so that they are not overly incented to pursue supply side and grid side solutions over demand side solutions.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. I got two hands up. We got Brian and then Jim.
Thank you, Judge. Brian Talley for Pepco and Delmarva Power. I just want to, similar to April's question, are we saying, as Jim and or Dylan, are you saying that we, on our current unamortized balance or unamortized balance in the future, we should not be earning the return we're earning right now, or the weighted average cost of capital?
Do you mean during a pay down scenario,
Or just, I heard Jim say, maybe it's more directed to him, is that with their utilities are earning on this amount, and why, there's some grayness around what we should be earning potentially. Maybe I'm misquoting him, rather than just saying it is the weighted average cost of capital that we're earning. Is he saying something different?
Well, I'll let Jim weigh in here, but just while I have the mic, OPC is not saying that the utilities shouldn't earn a return as we pay down the balance. That is the proposals, that you should earn a return on the balance as it is paid down. And the primary mechanism to mitigate the cost to ratepayers of utility earnings isn't to take away your return, but is to, in fact, pay down that balance.
Just to be clear, when we say the return, it would be at the weighted average cost of capital, or WACC?
That's OPC's proposal. And this is something, to the earlier conversation, I don't think I have heard any response to on the utilities, is that you would introduce a performance basis to that rate of return. So we calibrated it so that the rate of return plus the PIM would be approximately the same as the weighted average cost of capital during the paydown period. But there would be a performance basis to both the PIM and the rate of return, so that the utilities could earn more than, potentially, or less than that based on their performance toward a goal.
Yeah, I believe your range was like 75 to 125 or something like that.
That's right.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, and that's the proposal OPC made, back at the beginning of February.
Jim, you want to jump in, sir?
Thank you, sir. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates, and responding both to Brian and April's question. I mean, I don't think that's exactly what's at issue here, whether my proposal or OPC's proposal or opinion about what the right, whether the utility should be amortizing at WACC or not. I think what's issue is the commission said, we don't want to see this amortization, this amortized balance as large as it is. We are very concerned about the rate impact of financing these costs on ratepayers, and we want to see it become less. So if we're starting from scratch, it's, I think, a different conversation about, well, what's the right rate of return, and what should the incentive mechanisms be? What incentive mechanisms should be tied to the utility earnings and so forth. But I right off at this moment, I don't have an opinion about what's the right rate of return for a utility. I have an opinion that the commission wants to see the balance reduced, and I have a very strong position that we shouldn't be talking about the utilities earning any kind of performance incentive unless that is addressed, because it's enough. That's my opinion. It doesn't need to be more.
All right, thank you, sir. And anybody else comments or questions for Chris and the utilities before we move on? All right, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time and your patience today. All right, is anyone here from SMECO? I know they submitted comments separate from the utilities or in addition to. I don't know if anybody, I assume everyone had a chance to read it. Does anybody want to comment on that, or we'll just kind of leave it for what it is?
Sir, this is Jim. If I can ask, are these reply comments? Because I did not see reply comments either from SMECO or the utilities. And I don't see them anywhere in my trash or.
Yes, sir. Yeah, the utilities submitted something on the 7th, which is kind of what Chris touched on. And I had assumed everyone had gotten the SMECO comments, but perhaps not. So I will dive in and see if I can't send them along to everyone.
I got them, Judge.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I'm sure they were sent, and I don't know. I've got 3 different security things going, and I can't find them in any of them. So thank you.
I'll shoot them to you, sir. All right.
And good morning. Jennifer Raley's on for SMECO. If there is any questions around that, Jeff had to jump off briefly for another call, and he will be back on within a half hour or so if there's questions.
Okay. Well, all right. We'll circle back then. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right. Jim, do you want to step up, sir?
I'd be happy to, Your
Any
Honor. Jim,
comments? You were
Yeah.
Running hot.
I used some strong language, Jim Gravatt, on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates. And I mean, I think you've already heard today, I just gave a very brief summary of what our comments are, I think. But it's very hard for me to hear, to read the utilities' initial comments and their proposal with all the concern expressed for the ratepayers when we see how much the amortization is costing. But again, separate issue. Really what I object to is the suggestion of a performance incentive for coming in under budget, which I just think policy-wise is a terrible idea for performance incentive. I mean, I used to put together budgets for utility programs. I did it for a long time. And even without a performance incentive, when people are putting budgets together, there's a strong motivation to give yourself enough room to do what you need to do, because nobody wants to have to go to a commission and say, we under budgeted, we need more money. So and clearly that's evidenced in what OPC has shown in their filings about the utility performance in the past. I'm not saying it's bad that the utilities come in under budget. That's great. But to get paid more for doing what you're already doing strikes me as troubling, to say the least. And it especially concerns me regarding equity programs, low-income programs, because we know those cost a lot more. So that creates a disincentive for the utilities, in my view, to invest in those programs. I can't in any way support such a performance mechanism or more utility earning on top of the amortized balance. That has to be dealt with first. And as far as the suggestion for a performance mechanism that other parties have raised, Series and OPC, about an equity-focused performance incentive, our view is that if a role for the utilities is identified that is tied to implementation of specific low-income or equity-focused programs that do not compete with the DHCD programs, then it would be appropriate to tie, potentially, if the amortized balance is dealt with, a performance incentive to that. I would not support, do not support the idea of the utilities earning an incentive for doing a good job of marketing and promoting the low-income programs. Personally, I believe that's their obligation. So I can't see any reason why they should be paid to do that in an incentive way, why the shareholders should be paid more to do that. I know that wasn't necessarily initially the utilities proposal, but I'm just saying I wouldn't support it. And I think that's pretty much what we said, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Any comments or questions for Jim? All right. I think you got a lot. Oh, yes. There you go. Maren.
Yes, hi. Maren Mahoney on behalf of the Series Energy Optimization Work Group. I just wanted to make a very brief comment about the equity PIM that Jim mentioned. This sort of goes to I was unaware of this large amortization balance when we recommended an equity PIM in the first place. And so I would ask that our initial comments be taken with that caveat in mind. That was recommended outside of an amortization balance. So I would agree. I don't think that utilities should be earning, especially on top of a low income program when there is such a large balance, and those programs are costly and have a great impact on people's lives. So anyway, just wanted to make that point. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. All right. Anybody else for yes, Dan.
Thank you, Dan Hurley, Commissioner Staff. I just have a question kind of on the equity side of the equation here with DHCD most likely continuing to offer a limited income program. What type of programs can the utilities offer that are reaching this equity and reaching out to the limited income customers that aren't being addressed by DHCD? I'm just getting an idea of some example of what we can do as we move forward. I mean, the PIM sounds interesting, but if there's if we don't have a program to match the PIM, then we're never going to have a PIM. So.
Sure, I'd be happy to respond to that. Dan, thanks for the question. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And, I think it deserves some thought. It's something that we've been talking about for, 5 years anyway, that with a low income goal, it's not necessarily assumed that that would be met all through the programs that DHCD has been running. The utilities, several of the utilities, at least, have been doing food bank distribution of LED bulbs over the last couple of years. Now, that may or may not continue to be a viable program model going forward, but that's a very different kind of program than what DHCD does. The utilities already have all these relationships with the manufacturers and distributors of the bulbs, and it seems like it's a lower lift for them to do something like that than for DHCD to move into that kind of space. It's possible there could be utility promotions of appliances, appliance replacement programs. I know Efficiency Vermont has done a program where some low-income customers can self-certify in a phone call and have and the utility, Efficiency Vermont in this case, partners with a local distributor to deliver a new appliance to the household. It's a different model than the comprehensive. Now, that may also funnel that customer into the comprehensive program, but it gets them something they need right away, gets some savings right away, and gets them in the door. So I think there may be room to discuss program models like that, but in a at least a sort of a policy hypothetical framework. Those are the kinds of things I was thinking of. Does that help, Dan?
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else for Jim? All right. All right. Thank you, sir. And you should have a couple copies of Smecco's comments in your inbox, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. All right. OPC, Dylan, Nicole, do you guys want to talk about your reply comments? I know you guys kind of hit on a lot of that stuff already.
Yes, Your Honor. Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. Very briefly, I obviously have said quite a bit today, so I would just focus on one of our points. We don't believe it's appropriate to tie, obviously we have objections with the idea of a PIM on top of the cost of the unamortized balance, and we have our own proposal, but we certainly do not think that earnings should be tied to underutilization of budgets. We don't feel like that is a real incentive for performance. And as we pointed out in our reply comments, every utility would have received that performance incentive using let me check this, I apologize. If we look at the program budgets for the program budget for 2018 to 2020, every utility would have qualified for the highest tier because essentially they did not use their full budgets. And we don't think that's a true incentive for performance because frankly, if anything, it's an incentive to overestimate budgets, and I'm not suggesting that would be the case, but we do know that the utilities reportedly routinely come in under budget. So it's just not an incentive in our eyes, and we think that it would be much more appropriate to tie any PIM to actual performance. And that's not suggesting that that would be the case, but simply it's just not an incentive. And we also touched on, Joe Loper had a concern that these processes related to determining whether the utilities met their performance goals would kind of bog down the EAG work group. And we would just say that we think that will get worked out. We don't think that's a reason to not consider performance-based earnings. And the numbers that we're talking about here, we don't feel are so significant that that should just cause the EAG work group to be able to not be able to function. So that was just something we addressed, but everything else we've essentially covered in our questions to Mr. Walls, who I appreciate answering so many questions. Thank you.
All right. Excuse me. Thank you, ma'am. Any response or questions to OPC's reply comments?
This is Joe Loper. I have a question for clarification, Nicole. If there's a goal requirement that the utilities have to make, then the cheaper they can do it, the better. And everyone is, it seemed, so you're saying that they would estimate budgets in the program plans, so then they could come back later and say they were under budget.
To clarify, I'm not suggesting that would be the case, but that's the incentive that would be provided. And why would we provide an incentive that works in that way? I'm not saying that program administrators would do that on purpose, and I'm not saying that there's obviously a reason to make sure you have enough money in your budget, and that's legitimate. But it's not an appropriate incentive mechanism because it relies entirely on the estimate of budgets versus actual performance. But of course, we want programs to be obtained with the least cost possible, but we think that incentive hopefully is already there because that's already been what's happening. We see that the budgets are coming in under every time consistently, for the most part.
Okay, thanks. I'm just trying to sort out there's a lot of planning that goes in and stakeholder engagements on plans and budgets. And so I'm just trying to think how you can get an incentive, or what sort of incentive you set up that doesn't involve those uncertainties up front and people gaming in a way the situation, right? I mean, if you have an incentive that's based on just savings, then if that kind of thinking is going on, then people would also tend to want to underestimate their savings potential. And so you have all those debates that go on in the program planning process. And so I'm just a little unclear how it's different. I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way. I'm not even opining, just trying to understand it.
And I can't speak. I'm going to see if Dylan can speak more to that issue. But what I can say is what we really want is performance. So shouldn't we incentivize our actual goal, performance, versus budgeting concerns? But maybe Dylan has some more direct responses to your point. Thank you.
Well, I'll add a little bit, but no, Nicole, I think you've said straight on. I think it's a matter of emphasis and where we want the eyes. We want the program administrator's eyes to be on performance. I think you're right, Joe, that you have to set the levels right for any PIM to work. It has to have the right level of ambition, not too easy, not too hard, and you have to pick a number. And the utilities will always have a financial interest in setting the bar low. If they're going to earn for exceeding the bar, they will always have that in place. So I think that's true. I do think that we look forward to a goal setting process that includes a potential study and includes commission process and other features that hopefully results in an ambitious but achievable savings goal. So of course we could set the bar too high, or the utilities want to set the bar too low. I think we're having a conversation about the outcome that's important in that case. Second, the last thing, and Nicole said this, but just to emphasize, we have this track record where the utilities are not just a little under budget, but fairly substantially under budget. So that really adds to the concern that paying for a PIM based on that is just sort of mismatched with sort of what's actually happening.
Yeah, thanks. And my experience, at least in Maryland, is the process up front is very much stakeholder driven, that the utilities sometimes come with 3-year plans that don't spend enough, or that, where they, I remember in a situation, I raised it before, where, utility came in with a budget, and they said they couldn't meet goal and be cost effective. And they were basically told to go back and, meet goal. And so I guess I'm trying to, it seems like the budgets are always a part of the discussion, and that the utilities, I could see how they're incentivized to overestimate their budget, in part because stakeholders are insisting that they have sufficient budget. And so what I'm hearing is that there's now going to be an emphasis not on the budget. You can spend however much is needed. You should spend however much is needed to go achieve a set amount of savings associated with a potential study, or however, whatever discussions are going to go around that goal stringency. It seems to me the stakeholders and everybody are going to be involved in deciding what the budget is that's needed to make that. And because like y'all said in the last meeting, you do a potential study that tells you, that'll give you your technical, economic, and economic potential, and then you have your achievable potential that becomes, much more kind of subject to gut feelings of all of us, and different people's different experiences with programs. Some people have had great experiences. They're going to have higher achievable associated with an economic potential, and some people have had less positive experiences. And so I'm not arguing. I'm not for arguing for anything. I'm just not entirely clear where these distinctions between costs, or program cost and savings and goal and not goal and all that align.
So a couple of quick responses, and I see Jim has his hand up. So first of all, whatever scrutiny and accountability sort of and process that is on the budgets now that you're you're talking about, Joe, not talking about removing any of that. So whatever sort of scrutiny or sort of focus on the budget that exists would continue to exist. Sort of second of all, in terms of the stakeholder involvement, I mean, I have personally less length of history in Maryland than you and many others here. But in terms of the level of stakeholder involvement in the design of programs, I think Maryland has substantially less structured stakeholder engagement than many of the other states that are strong energy efficiency performers. So, and in many of those states, it's very difficult for stakeholders to provide real accountability on budget estimates. I do think that is a particularly difficult thing for stakeholders to provide accountability on. So I think there are reasons to, whatever exists would continue to exist. But I don't think there's really I think it's difficult for stakeholders to be very involved in planning decisions in Maryland compared to some other places. And I think it's particularly difficult for them to second guess utilities on budget estimates. And the last comment I would make is to your point about, well, these are two sides of the same coin, right? How much savings can you achieve? What is it going to cost? I agree. What OPC is saying is that the utilities' earnings should be performance-based. Today, they are not performance-based. They are, you spent this much money, you can earn this much money. There is not a performance basis. So at some point, if you follow the principle, and you may or may not agree, but I think there's a lot of agreement that performance basis for earnings is a better practice, you have to pick a metric. We heard from the utilities just today, and Chris is not wrong. Make it relatively simple. So I think if you have to pick a metric if you want the goals to be performance-based, and we think there's some good reasons why having it be based on the desired outcome is a good way to do it.
I'm sorry, Judge, can I just stay in this thread?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
At least my opinion about a PIMS is that it's going to involve upfront and on the back end stakeholder engagement. That people got to, you are going to be involved, and everybody's going to have an opinion about what that goal should be. What the structure of that PIMS and goal should be. But then once you decide all that, then you got to go decide the details of it. And I don't think y'all are just going to say, let Joe Loper go do it. And you're certainly not going to say, let the utilities decide that. And you're right. And so there's going to be a stakeholder process that is probably elevated or needs to be greater than what the stakeholder process currently is.
You don't mean, sorry, Joe, you mean after the goal has been set to evaluate the achievement of the goal? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, both. So right now we have a stakeholder process to decide the structure of the goal, or, try to figure out what is the metric that's going to be used. Then you have to, after that, and this will not be done in this work group, I assume, will be a stakeholder process that goes and decides what the quantity of the goal is, right? And so the magnitude of the goal and how a lot of assumptions underneath that are going to be decided, and or what they are. Either going to have to lock them down and decide them, or you're going to have to say, this is how we're going to decide them later. And then on the back end, you have to come in and deal with all the uncertainties that are going to be there, that are associated with all the things you didn't think of up front. And I assure you, there will be many. And the reason I'm coming to this, Dylan, I'll get to my point here, is if we're talking about a stakeholder engagement process in Maryland that is not up to snuff now, it sounds like in this context, we need to be talking about how we get that stakeholder process up to snuff, because it's going to be even more important that it be fully, operative and satisfactory to all the stakeholders if you have a PIM.
So all of what you just said, Joe, is right, and all of what you described about the stakeholders, the setting, picking the goal structure, picking the quantities, figuring out achievement of those, that's all absolutely true. You and the commission's evaluator would play a critical role in that, and that's true regardless of whether or not you have a PIM or not. We've decided we want a greenhouse gas goal for Maryland, for Empower. You're going to have to set that goal, and then you're going to have to evaluate how they did, and the utilities will take a first crack at that, and you'll do your scrutiny of that. That's all true. And so I think that the point Nicole was making was, if you add a performance basis to that outcome, yes, it changes the stakes some, but we don't have reason to believe that it breaks the system to do that. And in terms of a stakeholder process, it didn't get a lot of focus. OPC did suggest that maybe the time is right for Maryland to consider a stakeholder board like a number of other jurisdictions have. So I think we're probably not quite prepared. And Judge McLean might not really like to sort of take us down that rabbit hole, but certainly did say that that's an option and would have some merit.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. I was just trying to understand how this all breaks down, why one goal is better than the other in terms of in that bigger context. Thank you.
Now, OPC's proposal was 3 different metrics, and I think that speaks to why multiple things matter. It does have to be balanced against some simplicity and some transparency. And the utilities have said, well, we think it should be this way. I think, and Nicole's question was, well, if it was that way, would you be on board? I think that's up to the utilities to sort of comment on.
Yeah, I actually commented to Dan at our meeting this week that it's if the PEMS came to pass and people we have a goal now that's just based on megawatt hour. We have a TRM that locks down most all of the assumptions and certainly methodologies that we use for the gross savings to determine first year gross savings, for goal. But that doesn't include, estimated useful life. It doesn't include a lot of things, right? And certainly doesn't include all the things, the net to gross and the incremental costs and all the things that go into a cost effectiveness. We do that on as we go, as we say, latest, greatest for cost effectiveness. But our ability to make people comfortable with that goal and not create a lot of fights around the goal, and whether the utilities were meeting goal, was to lock down in effect most everything that we do. There are some exceptions, some bill analysis and stuff, but most everything is basically TRM'd. So as long as you get your participation, you're going to get your goal, kind of, you know, for those, at least for those measures. If anything that you include in a PIM is basically going to need to be locked down in effect also, or anything that's outside the control of the utilities. I think that was even in y'all's comments. Everybody agrees on that. So then we're going to need a separate, I think we need another set of books, if you will, right? We got a set of evaluation and cost effectiveness books for goals and PIMs. And that's where a bunch of stuff is locked down and all that. And then we got another set of books that is us going and doing evaluation and coming up with what we think are the most accurate numbers given the latest, greatest information so that we can inform stakeholders going forward.
I'm not sure I follow how that's different from what's happening now.
Well, no, that's right. No, that is what happens now, but that's just for the goal. Now, if we're talking about a PIMS, then it potentially expands the number of different things that we're dealing with.
I'm not quite sure.
So if the goal is just related to if we just have a greenhouse gas goal, right? Then we just lock down EULs. We got to lock down GHG assumptions. We got to deal with the methane, right? We got all these, additional set of things that have to go into the TRM, but we're not dealing with any of the cost effectiveness related things. And when I'm hearing performance or incentives, I'm hearing things related to how do you go achieve goal at lowest cost. There's a cost effectiveness, I think, component at least in that.
No.
Okay.
No. The OPC's proposal is achievement of the goal. That's the metric. So I think you could use, and there's obviously different choices that you could make for what to lock down, and potentially disagreements about what's in the utilities control, what's not. But those are the same things you're debating now and having to settle. I don't think there's any difference to have an earnings award based on that. It's still the same metric of how well did you do on your goal. It is the OPC's sort of proposal for this PIM is not a cost effectiveness based PIM. It's a how well did you achieve the GHG goal. So I think you would use the same methodological framework for assessing that you would for the goal itself.
Okay. So, that simplifies things.
Simple clarification. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how much they spend to achieve the goal, as long as they achieve the goal in terms of the performance incentive itself. As long as they're within budget, of course.
I think it would. You're right, and I think the proposal is that we would rely on the same kinds of scrutiny that are happening now on their budgets. And, I would not want to overestimate that, but I do agree. Stakeholders and the staff and the commission, they look at the budgets, they assess, well, that budget looks too high or too low. That would all still happen. So it's not correct to say there'd be, it wouldn't matter what the budgets were, but the performance basis payment would, yes, be based on achievement of the savings.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Jim, you still got a question, sir?
It's an observation responding to what Joe was saying, which has maybe been beaten to death already. But Joe, I think I agree hypothetically that a cost-based PIM and a savings-based PIM have all the same issues. But in Maryland, there's already a very, very strong mechanism for assessing savings performance. So I don't think we'd have to reinvent that. There'd be some additions, of course, but I don't think it's a reinvention. And in terms of costs, we know I don't like that metric, but partly because I don't think it's going to get us anything. I don't think it's going to change anything in a substantive way. If we look at what the utilities are already doing now, what we can say is they know they have an obligation to deliver at least cost. They know the commission is very concerned about what they're spending. And on some level, they know that if they risk, if they blow money somewhere, they risk the commission deciding that that was an imprudent investment and disallowing their recovery. So there are mechanisms in place that I think the utilities understand very well about managing costs. And I agree with Dylan in particular. I mean, I think that on the level of scrutiny that goes into different aspects of the Empower plans, I don't think anybody's doing a deep dive into the costing. And it does happen in other states. I know what it's like for commission staff to send 20 rounds of discovery to the utilities, digging into every dollar and every line and every budget. We don't do anything like that in Maryland, and I'm not sure it would be particularly productive if we did. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Lindsay, you had your hand up a while ago. Do you still have a question, ma'am? Or a comment?
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Lindsay North from PHI. It was a while ago. To be fair, there was a lot of discussion. So I was weighing whether or not. I just think that the one thing that I don't want people to lose sight of in the face of all of this is fundamentally, we, the utilities, are excitedly, but going to be endeavoring likely on a new set of programs. These are not mature, likely. There's going to be some new programs. So I just don't want folks to lose sight of that that element to all of this. And I hope that people are keeping that in mind as a measurement for where we talk about how much we want to push the bounds on PIMs and other things. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, because everybody, wants to reiterate their points. In other jurisdictions where there have been new programs that have started, there typically hasn't been a penalty-driven PIM in those first couple of years. And that's simply because there's typically room to allow for the utilities to get started, get our feet under us, deploy things effectively. So I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of that key point.
Hey, Lindsay, we're not talking about, or people haven't been talking about penalty-driven PIMs. It's more incentive PIMs, correct?
Well, it depends on how you would read the OPC proposal, right? So if we take the OPC proposal at face value, and there's no ability for us to recover the WACC, right, which is our weighted average cost of capital, then we would be relying on PIMs to some degree to make that up. And that's on top of executing new programs. I think that's how I understood it. So others should, interject if I'm misunderstanding that. But to me, that's where the conflict, I think, lies, at least in my mind, and other utilities should jump in.
All right. Thanks, Lindsay.
I think that's actually, I think you read it pretty close, Lindsay. You would need to perform in order to earn the equivalent of that. Whether earning less than your WACC is a penalty or not, given the cost recovery, I don't know, but I think you're reading it correctly, and so that is part of the proposal.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, I didn't understand it necessarily as a penalty driven, but I understand the distinction. Joe, you had a question, sir.
I'm paid to be smart, so I'm sorry that I'm so dumb so often. I don't really understand the difference between a penalty and, the incentive and the penalty. I mean, if I were in business and somebody said, if I achieve, 100% of something, I'm going to be driving to that and assume I'm going to get there. And if I somehow can't get there, to me, it's a penalty. Or it's just a different way to think about it. Or if it's 80, what ultimately matters beyond what's called a penalty or a bonus or whatever is where that goal is set, where those markers are for when you don't get paid what as much as you could have gotten paid. Am I thinking wrong about that somehow?
Well, mm, I think that your point is whether something feels like a penalty or not is based on the sort of psychological, like, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what I said I was going to do, here's what I expected to do, and if I do less than that, then that's a penalty. But I think it really does depend a little bit on the accounting treatment, because if the utilities if the utilities were using 100% debt to finance the programs, and they borrowed money at a certain interest rate, and then they ran the programs, and they were complete flops, and they failed to perform, and the utility earned sort of no return, just to make it sort of an extreme. That's a different kind of penalty. They still have to pay for that debt, so they're still paying that. And if they're not able to even recover the cost of that debt, that's an aggressive type of penalty. Whereas if you have an expensing treatment of accounting, where you're treating them as expenses, there's no capital raised, whether it's debt or equity, then I think the question of if you earn 0 PIM or if you earn the sort of target PIM, whether you call those penalties or not, maybe what you're telling your investors you're going to make, or sort of the psychology of it. But a PIM is a form of earnings that makes sort of sense on top of an expensing basis. I don't know if that answers your question. And I think that it is a little bit more complicated to sort of think about whether it's a penalty or an incentive when you're making an adjustment to a rate of return.
Well, it seems I'm not sure I understand that distinction. If they're financing, or doing it, if they're financing, then they have an expected rate of return associated with that borrowing in either case. And if they get a lower rate of return on that financing, then that's bad. And if they have a higher, that's good.
Yeah.
And likewise with expensing. And so ultimately, it just ultimately, no matter where you draw your line for your goal or your various lines, we could call them penalty lines or bonus lines, it seems to me. And so that's why I may just be missing the boat, but I'm not. I've heard it actually a lot out there. I think ACEEE has done it too, or a lot of people that I've looked around at, where they refer to, PIMs where there's a penalty or not. And I haven't quite been able to figure out what the real difference is.
Well, so what Lindsay, what I was hearing, and you were saying, and you could correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but you were saying, particularly in the beginning of more period of innovation, I think maybe, Joe, what that means is sort of it can be useful to give us or allow us to earn more than our weighted average cost of capital, but it's not okay to have us earn less than our weighted average cost of capital, regardless of our performance, if you want us to be innovating and trying new things. So only have an upside and not have a downside. I think that's the idea. And if that floor is sort of you're earning your weighted average cost of capital, then I do think it's possible to distinguish a reward versus a penalty if you can only get more than that, but you can't get less than that. And I'm not agreeing with that position. I'm just that's sort of what I was hearing. And I think that does make a distinction between penalty and reward meaningful. How hard it is to get above the WACC is another question. But if you just have a floor, and I don't think this is what OPC's position is that you have a floor, you always get your WACC, and you can get more than that.
And so just so I'm clear, so then if you didn't get your floor, then you would get a with the PIM you're proposing, was it WAC based? So you would get a lower return in the out years, in the initial years, right? That wouldn't be the case, but later on, somehow you would get a lower than WAC return.
Well, and in the full out years, there is no WAC.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. So,
but in the near term, until your all the amortization is done.
That's right.
You would be giving a lower than WAC for not meeting goal.
That's right.
Okay.
But, again, I think there's some sort of conceptual numbers. These were broad numbers in the proposal. But so conceptually that's accurate. But, sort of how you set some of those points, I think is important. And there could be discussion about different ways to set those points. And I would revert to the point you've made repeatedly, which is absolutely right. Where you set that bar of 100% is at least as important as whether the bottom end is 75% or 70% or 50%. Like, they all move together. So, that setting of the target point and that goal is a critical piece. And again, that's something we have to tackle, and the commission has to tackle one way or the other. Somebody's got to set a goal here, whether there's any earnings associated with it or not.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Anybody else? All right. Jeff, are you with us now, sir, from SMECO?
I am here.
Sir, you didn't necessarily miss any questions, but did you want to kind of give a brief overview of, SMECO's proposal?
Sure. And what we were looking at there and what we submitted is SMECO can agree to that unamortized portion, that payment over 10 years. That's kind of what we showed out in the math. Where we really have pause and hesitation is beginning the expensing of the programs, starting there with the new program cycle. It's big numbers there. Once you look at that, and the payback period for that really takes us out to 2047 before we call it, taking us to neutral after we pay off all this debt. So we're good with the unamortized piece, the expensing. We get that the commission probably really doesn't want us going back to amortizing and growing that debt once again. So we'd have to find something in the middle. But that's where we are with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Any comments or questions for SMECO and their proposal?
Yeah, I have a question, Your Honor. So, Jeff, can you clarify that a little bit more for me? I'm sorry, I'm not following on, but I think what I heard you were saying is moving to expensing is reasonable or could be acceptable, but paying down the balance is fully is a concern. Or was it
the opposite?
Okay.
The opposite.
So paying down the balance, I guess I don't really understand that. So help me walk through this a little bit more. Paying down the balance is what drives a surcharge increase, not a move to expensing.
Well, the expensing, once we begin that in, say, 2024 or 2023, I believe, that will cause an increase to what we know today, because we're taking expenses that we've never expensed before, and then all of a sudden expensing them in that year. So that does create an increase all by itself.
Yep.
Not to mention the increase of the surcharge along with the unamortized piece. That help?
Yes. And so I think I think it does. I guess I'm good.
Well, I see you're pausing. So, I mean, if you think of something later, don't hesitate to reach out and email me or call me, and I'll try my best to explain it. It's just some rather large numbers there that we've come up with for what it looks like to the membership here, and we just want to be conscious of all that. So.
Right, and so what you're modeling and what you're concerned was sort of, so in year X, you're continuing to pay, the amortization costs as they exist, and you're fully expensing that year's program costs. So that's
correct.
It's an immediate hit, right? Did you consider more of a transition whereby you're paying down the balance to zero over time, which could be managed, and so you could have a smaller increase in the surcharge, but as you get down to paying the balance to zero, you're able to sort of transition to expensing. Is that something you looked at?
We've talked internally. We haven't modeled it, but that is something we would consider that more than just going to a straight expense.
Yeah.
In a given hard year. Yes, that would help glide into those numbers. But we'd have to do that modeling. But yes.
Okay. I think that would be. I first of all, I appreciate you doing this. I think this is helpful. I think that type of a scenario might have some more appeal to OPC potentially. So if you want to think about that a little bit, or if it's helpful with the other utilities, I think we're going to send some written requests for information. I think that's worth considering. I guess I'll leave it at that for right now.
Yeah, and we'll need to do a little bit of math on our end. I heard the conversation earlier around the calling out the residential. We have a blended rate there in what we showed. So we need to provide the residential rate and the C&I rates. And so we've got to tease those numbers out as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. Anybody else? Comments or questions on SMECO's filing? Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Judge. Dylan, I just wanted to follow up on your comment. If that particular approach of smoothing the impact is potentially appealing, if you could put that in any follow-up questions of what you're thinking about and have the utilities respond to that or think about that. I think I was following you, but if you could just put a little bit more detail around it, I think that would help us as well.
Yeah. Okay. I will do, Chris. I'm gonna have to just get some lunch in my brain before I do that. But I will check with OPC and follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and here, how we looked at it, Dylan and others, is there's a lot of different levers, as we've all talked about over the years, of what we can move. Is it changing amortization out of the 5 years to 4, 3, and whatever? Is it expensing different program costs? We just don't want to run the model 50 different ways. So if somebody wants to be direct and say, here, take a look at this, we can do that. But there's just so many different ways we could slice and dice, that changing from an amortized to an expensing model. So that's
understood.
Okay, thanks.
We'll try to follow up with some questions that we can make as specific as possible, or data or requests as specific as possible.
Okay.
Anybody else for SMECO? All right, Jeff, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you pulling double duty today.
Yeah, Amanda and Molly had us on an ED commercial rate calls.
I know you would have preferred to have been here.
Certainly.
All right.
Don't tell them that.
No, of course not. All right. AOBA, is anyone from AOBA here? They filed some brief comments as well.
Yes, Judge. This is Tim Oliver with AOBA here. And I guess our comments were fairly brief. And our concern is that this is happening on such a high level that when we get to specific utility impacts, as Joe was talking about with these stakeholder processes, essentially we're going to need something like a stride rate case for each utility to determine the impacts by rate class and how these programs are going to be evaluated, implemented, and what each utility specific goal is going to be. And so our concern is that we can agree on sort of a framework for the amortized balance, but how we actually move forward with these goals needs to be on a much more granular basis. And I'm available for any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here. Any questions for Mr. Oliver? Anyone want to have rate cases for all these? Rate case-like proceedings for all these? I'm sure they don't. All right. All right, going once, twice. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Oliver. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
All right. So I guess my question to the group would be, where do we go from here? Obviously, there's lots of differing opinions, or two different schools of thought, I guess. I know OPC has some questions that they're going to pose to the utilities. My question is, like, how quickly can you get the questions out, and B, how quickly can you turn the answers around?
I'll take a quick answer to that. I think that the easier task is on our side. I think we can do those today.
Okay.
I mean, I don't see any reason we can't get that today.
All right. And I'm guessing for the utilities, it's probably going to be, it depends on the complexity of the questions. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Judge. Yes, definitely. Depends upon the complexity and how quickly we can turn these around. We'll certainly do our best, but going back to my earlier comments, we want to provide very clear, eyes wide open analysis, and that sometimes takes time.
Understood. All right. Just looking at the calendar, I mean, the way I see it, I mean, feasibly, we've got probably 2 more weeks, maybe. I really don't want to say a third if we have to have it, but I guess, if we think there's going to be some kind of PIM breakthrough, then I'm happy to go to the 31st. But Chris, do you think you could have some, I'm assuming folks are going to want to meet on and discuss these responses, is it? Or again, that's just an assumption. We don't necessarily have to meet. But do you think that having something in advance of a few days in advance of the 24th would be possible? And again, I know you haven't seen the questions yet.
Well, Your Honor, if I can just jump in a little to add some flavor. I mean, I have stated some of the kinds of questions, and we can put them in writing and make sure they're precise. But questions like, can you model your PIM and the cost of that on top of the status quo, or can you extend out the analysis 5 more years just so we can see the sort of the actual cost of the balance getting paid off at the end? So, those are the kinds of questions, and hopefully those would not be that difficult. I think the other kind of questions are difficult, but not requiring a lot of engineering, like what level of surcharge impact do you think might be reasonable? Or do you think it's reasonable that we fundamentally have performance-based earnings? Those are positions and sort of statements. Those are questions that we'll ask too, and they don't require math, but they require, stating some positions.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm just kind of going off what the utilities were saying. But if we could have something for next week, that'd be great. I just don't know how feasible. Lindsay.
Judge, thank you. Lindsay North from PHI. Dylan, I just might offer, I think Jeff kind of put it really well. There's a lot of ways that we can slice and dice this data. And I think the more that you can position your questions in a way that you think is going to help us drive toward, a potential meeting point, I think is helpful. So for example, I think, like you mentioned, modeling our PIM proposal with the status quo. I don't know that that's, I mean, we can do it. I don't know that that's a useful use of anybody's time, because I'm not sure that that's what we're actually suggesting. So that would be the only thing I would offer about the questions, and that may help us sort of better focus on what analysis needs to get done so we can try and drive this thing forward, if that makes sense.
Well, so are you saying that the PIM proposal is not actually the proposal for the utilities?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
No, what I'm saying is we offered the request was, please put a proposal out there for a PIM. And so that's what we did. I think any PIM, and the other utilities should feel free to jump in here, but sort of my take on the PIM is that it's taken in context of the entire package, right? So if we're looking at the status quo doesn't have a PIM per se, not to say that we wouldn't be open to it, but to the point that other people have made, does that really respond to the request of the commission? Probably not. So I think our PIM is a proposal that should be considered in the context of the broader package of what we're trying to get to, which is be responsive to the commission.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Absolutely. And I think Chris said earlier, and I would strongly agree with it, the goal is to put in front of the commission data about different proposals. So you guys have put out a chart that says, here's the surcharge impact of the status quo, and here's the surcharge impact of OPC's proposal. We're asking for another line on that chart that says, here's what happens if you pursue the status quo with regard to the balance, which I understand is the proposal of the position of the utilities, and here's our PIM proposal. If those don't, that's not the package, then you could tell me what else the package is, but we just want to see the same kind of surcharge analysis for that as for our proposal, which you've done and may be good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Understood.
I mean, I also think that, it's OPCs and VEIC. I'm happy to ask questions. At some point, the questions become, what is the utilities proposal for handling the balance? I mean, I don't mean to be glib, but that's the question. I'm waiting to hear what is the proposal with the balance from the utilities.
Go ahead, April.
Hi, April O'Neill with BGE. I think what Lindsay was trying to say, though, is there's been pushback that OPC and others would not be on board of keeping our WACC plus a PIM. So I'm not sure what value you're going to get if we do that modeling. It's going to take time, but
yeah,
what are you going to get out of it?
I hear that.
So I want to balance the amount of work that we're doing in the modeling with scenarios that may be acceptable to OPC and others.
April, that's really I appreciate you sort of piercing through that, and I think that's fair, I guess, at the end of the day. And maybe there's a couple more weeks, of discussion and some back and forth, and maybe we get further along. If at the end of the day, that is the utilities proposal that they want to see reflected in the work group report that goes to the commission, then at that point, I hope there will be an equal sort of a surcharge analysis that includes the OPC proposal and the utilities proposal. Whether or not OPC likes it or not, I hope that's part of the record. But maybe we don't need to get there right now, and maybe we should better put our time into trying to see if there's could be some agreement on some other point. So I take that. I take that point.
All right, so why don't we do this? Dylan, you get your questions over to the utilities, and if the utilities could give us a kind of a guesstimate as to when they could have responses back to OPC and the group, we can figure out when we're going to meet again. Does that sound fair? Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Chris Walls with BGE. Yes, that's fair. As soon as we get them, we will quickly meet and determine how long, to the best of our ability, we think it will take to answer the questions.
Right. And again, my preference would be for our last meeting to be on the 24th. Again, so we can finish getting the draft out to everyone to review, hopefully once, if not twice. If that doesn't happen, maybe we can start sending the report out in portions to everyone. Nicole.
Yes, Your Honor. I was just going to say we'll work on getting those questions out today, and I would say at the latest tomorrow morning, but we'll try to do it today.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, somebody throw something in the comments. All right. All right, so we've got a couple things to talk about still, the gross versus net, and we've got Dr. Qualter here from Cadmus to talk about some of the low income issues. It's 12:30. Do we want to keep pressing, or do we want to break for lunch? I don't want to deprive anyone from eating. And I know a lot of you with cameras off are probably eating anyway, so it's really just maybe Judge Burke and myself. So does anyone have a strong feeling one way or the other?
I'm quite full right now.
Okay. Lindsay wants a lunch break. So let me just make sure. Dr. Qualja, if we take a 30-minute break, is that okay, sir?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely okay. No problem.
Okay, all right, great. We'll come back at 5 after 1. Thanks, everybody.
See you then.